Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are very excited for today's episode of the show because we are joining you from Puerto Vallarta, and we are talking all about what it's like to be here.
Yeah, we've been in Mexico for about a month now, and so we're excited to dive into that. I know there's a lot of people thinking about travel, adventure, so we're excited to talk a bit about that. Before we dive into it, we want to let you guys know about a new episode of The Insider that is out if you're listening to this when it came live. It's out right now, and it will be if you're listening to it later as well. And so this month on The Insider podcast, we're talking about if you just went remote and you're thinking about starting to travel, you want to go somewhere, you want to get out of the cold weather with your new kind of freedom in your remote job. How do you do that in a way that works, in a way that makes sure that everyone you're working with, your coworker, your manager, stay happy with your performance, your work performance, and allows you to be working in a way that's not stressing you out, enjoying your time wherever you choose to be. So we're diving into all that, and I know there's a lot of people who are kind of getting used to what it's like to work from home and maybe thinking, maybe I could work from home in Mexico. So we'll be diving all into that. You can go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers to sign up and get access to the World Wanderers Insider.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think a good place to start with this episode all about Mexico is talking a little bit about why we chose to come here, specifically to PV, where else we considered, and just maybe walking listeners through a little bit around our decision-making process, because although we are here and everything is great and we are so happy to be here, it wasn't necessarily the easiest decision to make.
Yeah, and so we're very aware that it's a weird time to be leaving home and traveling, and we weren't looking to just kind of go out and pretend like there's not a pandemic ongoing. We were looking for somewhere we could settle down, base ourselves kind of like we had been in Canada, but somewhere that was going to be warm, was going to be funner, and was going to allow us to avoid winter and just kind of get back into some of the things that we love about travel. And so Mexico seemed like the place to go for that. It's a place that we've spent a lot of time, as you know, if you listened to the podcast. We really love Mexico. We're really familiar with lots of different places. And just the fact that it's closer to Canada, if we needed to get back, it would be relatively straightforward, and that if things had kind of got worse around the world and travel had become harder again, it wasn't, too far away. There wasn't too many countries in between or too many oceans in between. It's relatively easy and safe to get back. And so then we started thinking about, okay, if we're going to go to Mexico, where do we want to go?
Yeah, and so obviously, if you guys have listened to the show, you know we love Mexico City. That's our favorite place to go. That's where we've lived on and off over the last couple of years. And we kind of thought about Mexico City as a place to start out, but Mexico City has the most cases of coronavirus in all of Mexico, which makes sense. It's a massive city, it's densely populated, and because of that, it's also had quite a few restrictions. So we thought, as of right now, it doesn't seem like Mexico City is the best place to be basing ourselves. So we started looking at a couple other options. We thought about some of the other cities we've been to, like Oaxaca, Guadalajara. We reached out to a couple of friends. We have friends in Guadalajara and Mérida, and we just started picking people's brains and asking people what things were like. And as we were communicating with other friends who either base themselves in Mexico or live in Mexico and have been over the entire course of this pandemic, we were chatting with our friends Sasha and Rachel from Grateful Gypsies, who you guys have heard on the podcast before, and they were saying, we're doing our yearly trip to Puerto Vallarta and you guys should come because it's awesome there, and it's going to be awesome again this year because there's going to be even less tourists than normal.
Yeah, and at that point, we had been thinking a lot about Puerto Escondido in Oaxaca, and we'd been thinking about maybe some other smaller places, beach towns, just for a bit more stability. Really, we were hoping to find a place that we kind of knew what the situation was like and could plan accordingly, and didn't want to end up in a situation where you show up somewhere and then the governor decides that they're doing like a really intense lockdown, or they're going back to do like prohibition. There's been lots of dry laws in different places in Mexico. Not that we really drink. We actually are not drinking at all this month, but just trying to find a place where there's not going to be kind of random, intense measures that come out of nowhere, and a place where we can kind of set up a stable life, a safe life, and go about our business. And so eventually we decided that Puerto Vallarta, and I'm going to say it the Mexican way, not in the English way, but Puerto Vallarta was the place for us because it's big enough that it has an airport that we can fly directly here. We didn't want to connect through Mexico City and then not stay in Mexico City. And so we could fly directly here. If we needed to go back to Canada, there's lots of flights back. So it was easy to go back if some emergency came up. The second thing for us was that it's an area that's quite touristic. And normally we try to, get off the beaten path and do some interesting things and maybe stay away from more touristic places. But in that sense here, it gave it a lot of stability, knowing that, if something happens, there's going to be, there's lots of Canadians here. There's lots of people from around the world. The regulations aren't going to get like so dramatic and intense out of nowhere in a place like this. And the third thing was, and this might even be the most important thing, was knowing people. So we're both feel pretty confident. We're both healthy people. But if one of us happened to get sick or one of us needed to like quarantine for a while, knowing and having friends in a place makes a big difference. And so we have friends here, and that if the worst situations happen, it was a good place to be for that reason.
Yeah, and I think one reason that you actually didn't mention that I think has been pretty important for us now that we are here is that it's warm here and you can do pretty much everything outside. And because of that, and because that's the case all year round, almost everything is open air. So I feel like 99% of our day is spent in areas that are a mix between indoors and outdoors. And in terms of actually maybe being a little worried about getting the virus or not wanting to get the virus, I think that definitely is something that brings a lot of like ease of mind.
Yeah, 100%. Almost everything's open air. It's so rare that you're in a space that isn't ventilated from outside or doesn't have, big open sides, open windows, open roofs. And so that was a big part of making life easy here. So we found a really nice Airbnb apartment relatively close to the beach in kind of the older, kind of more central part of town in Vallarta, away from the resort side and not into Zona Romantica. And we found a co-working space, and we've been able to find a gym and really set up a really quality routine here. But before we dive too much into what it's like here, I know people are eager to know what it's like. We want to talk a little bit about kind of the travel planning steps. So travel insurance is a big one of those. What was it like kind of figuring out how to navigate travel insurance?
Yeah, this was an interesting one. So after we made the decision, okay, we're going to go to Mexico, before we booked flights or anything, we actually had to make sure that we could get some insurance that would cover us to allow us to leave Canada. And so normally we book through World Nomads. Unfortunately, World Nomads is not covering Canadians right now because the Canadian government has a call for Canadians to not leave home or to not leave their country. They are covering Americans, which is really great. So if you are American, you can still use World Nomads. So we went into a big sort of deep dive into all the different types of insurance that were available. And we used the website Travel Off Path to get a lot of our resources. So they have been absolutely amazing throughout this entire pandemic. If you are trying to travel right now or you want to travel, check out Travel Off Path. It is an absolutely incredible blog, and it's got so much information for people from all over the world. But we ended up looking at Seven Corners, Heymondo, and Safety Wing. And all of these insurances that I just mentioned, so Seven Corners, Heymondo, and Safety Wing, they cover Canadians and Americans for both just your normal travel stuff. So, say one of us needs to go to the hospital because we broke our leg or, God forbid, or something like that. we would be covered. But then they also cover us in case we get sick with the virus and need to get tested, or we need to be hospitalized or something like that. And so we were really looking for that dual coverage, and we looked at all the different options that they were offering between those three companies. We ended up going with Seven Corners. They have a really affordable policy that has really, really great coverage. However, there are, pros and cons to each of these. And I would say Heymondo has really, really good coverage if you have a lot of gear or stuff that you want to be covered with that. That's one of the things Seven Corners doesn't cover. And Safety Wing is the most affordable. So if you're not super stressed about getting sick or about needing coverage, and you're fine with the idea of I might just have to pay for something if something happens, Safety Wing is extremely affordable, and it's really positioned for nomads. So that's a really great option if you're going to be out of your home country for quite a long time.
Yeah, and just to follow up there, I don't have the policies in front of me, but Safety Wing is a lot more affordable, and that's because the limits on things are a lot lower. So where some insurances might have $2 million in coverage if you have a terrible accident and need to be flown home and all that stuff, Safety Wings are significantly lower. And the premiums are higher. So there's premiums that you have to pay for certain things. So if you need to get a medical bill paid, you might have to pay a premium that's higher than the medical bill. So definitely something to check out and consider. Something else to consider, and I think this applies more for Canadians looking for travel insurance, and probably Australians, other people outside of the US, is a lot of insurance policies have a clause in them that their policies are void if you're traveling against a government travel warning. And for some reason, there are still travel warnings for every single country in the world from Canada. So, for example, World Nomads, if you're Canadian, you can go on the website and buy travel insurance. But, however, if you then try to use that travel insurance, it's going to be void. It only works in Canada. So that's something to be really aware of, finding one that doesn't have that. And so Seven Corners doesn't, Heymondo doesn't, Safety Wing doesn't, Manulife in Canada doesn't. They had recently launched a COVID one. We found it was quite expensive, and because they have one that covers COVID and one that covers everything else, it didn't really make a lot of sense for us. But important to know, there's kind of three categories. Insurance that covers COVID, there's insurance that covers everything else but not COVID, and there's insurance that won't work at all because it's void because of travel warnings. So just something to really dive into and check out.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and make sure that you're looking at, where you're from and where you're going, and then make sure that you're diving a little bit into the details of your policy just to make sure you're getting the coverage that you need based on, what you're most concerned about. And Mexico does not require any type of insurance, but there are some countries out there that are requiring proof of travel insurance. So this is another note of when you're planning your travels, you just need to make sure that you're really reading what needs to happen in order for you to enter a country. So we are not travel insurance experts. Just make sure that you are doing lots of research before you're booking your trip so you really understand what needs to happen. And this is just, unfortunately, an extra step that needs to happen right now because the WHO still has us, globally under a pandemic. And because of that, countries have their own policies in place. And then insurance companies are just trying to do their best to cover us as best as they can. So just make sure you're reading that fine print a little bit more than normal.
Yeah, and so let's take a really quick break and then get back to talk about what it was like traveling for the first time in 9 months.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by Away. Travel is weird these days, but no matter where you need to go this holiday season, Away offers a range of suitcases, bags, and other travel products made of different materials in a variety of colors and sizes. So whatever you need to bring with you, Away has luggage that will help make your future trip more seamless whenever it may be.
We're in Mexico right now, and this time I'm actually traveling with just my backpack and my Away suitcase. It is awesome to have. It has its durable shell, so I know it's good if I need to check it, but it's also small enough that I can bring it on carry-on. And so this time I flew carry-on with just my backpack and the Away suitcase. It's so much easier to wheel it around with its 360-degree wheels than lugging a big backpack with all of my stuff in it. So I'm really happy with my Away suitcase.
Yeah, and a couple other things that we love about Away are that the products are designed to last a lifetime, and if any part of your suitcase breaks, Away's standout customer service team will arrange to have it fixed or replaced. They also have a 100-day trial on everything Away makes, which means you can live with it, travel with it, even get lost with it for 100 days. And if you decide it's not for you, you can return any non-personalized item for a full refund during that period. No ifs, ands, or asterisks.
You can shop Away's full selection of suitcases and bags at awaytravel.com/wonders and give someone something to look forward to this holiday season. That's awaytravel.com/wonders.
So we had our flights booked, we had our Airbnb all sorted out, we had our travel insurance information put together. And one thing we should say on the travel insurance front, that we haven't made a claim with Safety Wing, Heymonda, Seven Corners, and that's kind of where the proof meets the pudding with all these things. So, those are the things we used, but we haven't had to make claims to them, so we can't speak to how that process has been. And that's important to clarify. But we were on our way. And this was going to be the first time we were traveling since March when we came back to Canada. And it's weird to think about because at that time, that was kind of when the threat of getting COVID was probably the highest, but there was no policies in place. And so we were crammed into small rooms and everyone was kind of just on edge and nervous. I remember we flew home wearing masks and it was kind of weird. At a border guard in the US in Houston, we were transferring through Houston back to Canada, actually kind of made a joke about me wearing my mask at that point. And it's weird to think now because if you take off your mask on a plane from Canada, their police are going to come and drag you off that plane. So anyways, there's lots of regulations and it's all very hunky-dory and flowers and rainbows.
Yeah, so let's get into the actual details of what it was like. So honestly, it was very, very much the same as every other trip we have taken. I think the major difference is that people are honestly much more respectful of each other's space, which was kind of nice in a way. And then, of course, we had to wear masks the entire time. So we were able to get a direct flight from Calgary down to PV. However, we were flying from Kelowna, which is a city in the interior of British Columbia, which is close to where Ryan's parents live. And that's where we had been staying for a couple of weeks prior to actually traveling to Mexico after we moved out from our place in Canmore. So we headed to the airport, just a normal amount of time early. I think about 2 hours early. Kelowna is not a super big airport and they don't have that many flights running right now because of the virus. So we headed there. We put our masks on right from the time that we got in the airport. Everything was pretty standard as we made our way through. We got temperature checked as we went through security, just through a body scanner temperature thing. And then they asked us a couple questions as we boarded the flight just to make sure we hadn't been in contact with anyone who had the virus or anything like that. Then we arrived into Calgary, and honestly, we barely had any time in Calgary. We walked off one plane and basically walked on to the other one. And I think the only thing that I really observed during that time was that the international terminal had 4 flights heading to Mexico, ours included, and it was just full of retirees, which shouldn't have been surprising because that would be the majority of people heading away for the winter. We have sunbirds in Canada.
Snowbirds.
We have snowbirds in Canada who head south for the winter. And I think I was a little bit surprised because a lot of the messaging that the news puts out and that type of thing is that if you're older, you should be staying at home. But there's a lot of Canadians who, like us, wanted to get out and get to Mexico. And basically, we were distanced as we headed onto our flight. And then, from there, distancing just goes out the window because planes are full. I think airlines are doing their best to only schedule flights that they can actually fill. And I get it. They were out of commission for so many months and they need to run businesses. They have great ventilation on WestJet, which is who we flew. And we wore masks the whole time. There wasn't in-flight service, so people weren't really eating and drinking that much. They just had bottled water and some cookies that they gave us. And when we arrived in, I guess, both Calgary and Mexico, people were really patient as people got off the plane. So normally there's that kind of like captain takes off the seatbelt sign and everyone undoes their seatbelts and kind of heads into the aisle to get their stuff ready so they can be the first off the plane. And that was the biggest thing that I observed that didn't really happen as we were traveling down to Mexico.
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward and pleasant, and we were really particular about trying to find a direct flight. Normally, we're not too stressed about connecting, but this time we just wanted to do the one connection in Canada and get to where we're going, because going through immigration in Mexico City is usually crazy, and then going all through the airport, or sometimes in the States as well, it can be a bit crazy because you have to go through immigration and then make all those changes for depending on your terminal. But yeah, we got here, we came through. And so if you're trying to come to Canada right now, there is a mandatory 14-day quarantine period where you can't leave your house or hotel or however you kind of choose to set yourself up. And they're actually prohibiting people from most countries from even traveling to Canada. Mexico is not like that. So if you're from, I don't actually believe Mexico has any additional regulations in regards to travel. So most people can come to Mexico, and going through the border, super chill, just kind of like normal.
Yeah, I think there wasn't, obviously we wore masks in the airport, and then there was no distancing. I think that was the thing I observed right away, is that there was just no distancing once we got off the plane, which was very different from Canada. And then we also went through a temperature scanner.
Right, that's exactly what I was about to say, the temperature check.
Yeah, and so it's just like a machine that scans, I think, your body for heat. And so it wasn't even like an inconvenience or anything like that. We walked through it, and then I was like, oh, did we just get temperature checked? And Ryan's like, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, pretty much similar to the one we went through in Kelowna before getting on our first flight. And so then we were off and into Puerto Vallarta, ready to go about our day. And so I want to talk a little bit kind of what things are like overall here. And so for that first trip, we get in an Uber and go on our way. This is the first time we've taken Uber in quite a while. And so Uber's got really great kind of like COVID precautions in place. So drivers and passengers need to put a mask on. The drivers here, which is another great thing about being in Mexico, usually just keep the windows unrolled. So there's lots of good ventilation in place. And so get to our place. And what was it like kind of just walking around, being here in Puerto Vallarta?
Well, it was warm, which was really, really nice because it snowed right as we were getting ready to leave Canada, like the day before. And also, the biggest thing I noticed right away was just the vibe is very different here. And I can't speak for other countries because I haven't been to other countries, but the vibe in Canada is very tense. It's very anxious, and there's a lot of fear, and I get it. We don't know what's going on. It's a very stressful time. People are stressed for a lot of different reasons. And I think the first thing I just really noticed being here is that it's not really like that. And I've been racking my brain over the last month as we've been here to just kind of think about why that is. And I think it's a blend between being in this beach town where a lot of people are on vacation. So not just people from other countries. This is a place where a lot of Mexicans come on vacation. And I think if you're from a big city like Guadalajara or Mexico City, I think it's probably really relaxing to be here in PV and go to the beach and just spend time with your family and friends. And so people are very chill because they're on vacation. And then I think it's also, a culture thing. The culture in Mexico is very different from our home culture of Canada. And I think that part of their culture is just being a little bit more relaxed and that type of thing. And that's been something that's been a very welcome change, I think, for both of us.
Mm-hmm. And so as far as kind of protocols and things of that nature, in Puerto Vallarta, I believe it's all of Jalisco at this point. And most places in Mexico, there's mask rules where you have to wear a mask at any time in public spaces, including outdoors, which is quite different than Canada. However, it's not, or it doesn't appear here to be overly strict. You'll often see police officers not wearing masks or police officers with masks just covering their chin. You'll see people walking around without masks. And from all the things I read and kind of the best of information that's out there, if you're outside and you're not spending a significant portion of time in a very close distance to someone, like talking outside for like 45 minutes, the odds of you getting COVID appear to be very, very low. So wearing masks outside doesn't seem to be like really have much of an effect, but it is the rule here. And then when you go into a business, they give you hand sanitizer and check your temperature. So you put on a lot of hand sanitizer, you can get your temperature checked a lot. And of course, wear a mask to wherever you're sitting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I kind of forget that the rule is actually to wear masks everywhere, because most people, at least here in PV, don't wear masks on the street. And it's very much enforced when you go into a building, into an indoor space. So there's usually somebody at the front of all restaurants ready to make sure you have your mask on, temperature check you, and give you the hand sanitizer, like Ryan said. So they actually like pump the sanitizer into your hand, which in Canada, they just had sanitizing stations and you would do it yourself. So that's a little bit different for us. And then in Canada, we also don't get temperature checked, or at least we didn't at the time that we were there. And so things have been like relatively similar to what we were used to, but also slightly different. And I think one thing that's really interesting here, and I mentioned this before, is in Canada, there's a law about the socially distancing or the physical distancing. And here, it's not as big of a thing. There are signs that say like distancia, and there's some places that have like little markers on the ground, especially, bigger businesses like Starbucks and that type of thing. But in general, there's not a lot of physical distancing being prioritized here. But like we said, everything is open air and you can do a lot of stuff outside here. So it seems like there's not quite as much a need for it because people aren't like forced into these small spaces where it's like freezing cold outside.
Yeah, because, certain places where you're in a confined air environment, back at home where it's winter, everyone has to be inside in the same space. Like that's really the danger zone. And because things are like almost everything's open air here, it does help a lot. That's not to say there hasn't been a lot of coronavirus in all of Jalisco, all of Mexico, quite high number of cases, not very many tests being done. So it's probably drastically higher than what is reported as well. But not diving in, I feel like it's a whole different type of podcast to dive into everything to do with COVID. But just kind of the general energy around here is, like people, probably like lots of people on the street wearing masks. You wear masks where, when you go into buildings, when you go into restaurants, you can sanitize. But overall, like Amanda said, it just does feel a little bit more chill. And for us, we didn't really we're not going out to bars at night. We're not doing anything that puts us into, or anything that we feel would be irresponsible. We're just kind of going about our day-to-day life. So we have our Airbnb, we go work at a co-working space, we've got a gym membership. At the gym, everyone wears masks. They have good hygiene protocols there to take care of it. And occasionally we'll go meet up with a couple close friends that we have here. And so overall, it's very similar to the way things were in Canada, but it's just way easier to do things outdoors. And I think that kind of goes to your point of saying, we were a bit surprised to see how many older travelers there were on our flight. But I think if you really think about it, it's almost safer to be here if you're able to, other than the travel experience, you're able to walk outdoors, you're able to take care of your health, get sun, be more active and do things outdoors with people and maintain distance, as opposed to at home where if you want to socialize in the winter, you have to do it indoors, where you can't go outside or you can't get sun, where you can't be the most healthy version of yourself. So I definitely do get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we've been up to. You mentioned this a little bit, and outside of kind of getting into this really nice routine, like you mentioned, of, walking to our co-working space, we work mostly during the day, going out for lunch, going for dinners, going to the gym. Mostly what we do is activities outside. So on the weekends, we go to the local beach in PV, which is called Los Muertos, or we go to a beach that's nearby. So far we've had the chance to visit Sayulita, which is about an hour 15 away in the state of Nayarit. And we've also been to Bucerias, which is also in Nayarit. And we've also headed south a little bit because there's some pretty cool little beach areas. So we did a beach hike to Playa Las Animas last weekend, and we also headed down to Playa Mismaloya, did some stand-up paddleboarding. So we've been getting outside a ton. So we've been able to fill our adventure bucket a little bit, but all of it is outside, which has been so amazing. So we've been able to do really cool things and really enjoy the experience here in PV while also feeling like, we're staying safe. One thing I wanted to talk about was we did have a 2-week pausa, which was kind of like a mini regulations that came into place for 2 weeks right around Dia de los Muertos and Halloween. Do you want to talk a little bit about what they put into place there and just kind of what that experience was like?
Yeah, so this was from, I think the 13th it was from October 30th to the 13th of November, if I'm correct. It could be 1 or 2 days off, but it was a 14-day increase in the regulations and rules that the government had in place here in Jalisco. So there wasn't anything nationally mandated, but something similar has happened in a few different places in Mexico. And so what that change meant was that businesses, bars, restaurants were forced to close at 8:30 p.m. And then on weekends in Jalisco in general, they all had to close other than doing delivery service. Here in Puerto Vallarta, they just had to close at 8:30 on all days. And then as part of this, they had banned Uber during those periods of time and had also forced beaches to close down at 3 p.m. So there were some things that if you were thinking about it seemed a little bit odd. But overall in PV, the restrictions didn't get too intense. In other parts of Jalisco, they did, although it appears that, the beach towns close to here were more on the schedule that PV was. So that happened, and they appear to be now working off of, instead of using case numbers, they're going to be working off of hospital occupancy rates, which have actually been very steady and slightly declining over the past 2 months. So it seems like, at least here, the odds over the next kind of 3-4 months of there being something similar are quite low. But it is a time where it's hard to project what's going to happen. But it does seem like the colder places in Mexico are the ones that are dealing with more of an increase in cases, and the ones on the coast aren't. And if you look at a lot of the hospitalization rates, they're pretty steady and not climbing. And so that was what happened here. And a few other places in Mexico, there's been increased regulations. So it's something we're kind of just keeping an eye on as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of interesting because at first we were like, oh, it's kind of annoying that beaches have to close at 3 and businesses have to close at 8:30. But it kind of didn't actually feel like that big of an inconvenience for us. And it didn't really change our behaviors that much because we're usually home by 8:30 anyways. We've already had dinner and that type of thing by that point on the average night. And having to get out the door a little earlier to get to the beach wasn't that big of a deal. So it's really, really nice that we're out of that. And now there's not any additional restrictions, which is really great. It's just kind of standard day-to-day stuff with the masks and temperature checks and sanitizing and that type of thing. But it was kind of interesting to experience that and also just experience that in a culture that is different from our home culture. So overall, we're feeling really, really good here. We are loving being back down in Mexico, and I think we're both really happy with our decision to come here.
Yeah. And so do you want to talk quickly about some of the other places in Mexico, kind of what we know about them and where we'd recommend if someone was thinking about going to Mexico?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that this stuff is changing so quickly that you really need to do your research if you're looking at going to a place. Everything is governed in Mexico state by state, for the most part. So you need to look at what the state is doing. So find out what state the city you're going to go to is, and then look at their restrictions. And other places in Mexico are sort of, I think, in similar situations to Jalisco, where masks are going to be mandatory. That is just going to be something that you need to be traveling with a mask at this point. You're going to need it on the plane. You're going to need it when you arrive in Mexico. And then being prepared to have your temperature checked and be prepared to use hand sanitizer. Other places that have a bit different restrictions. So I believe in Yucatan, which is where Merida and Cancun are, they have a declaration form that you need to fill out when you arrive there or as you're about to board your plane. So just do a bit of research into that because that's a little bit different. And they also have liquor laws that are a little bit more strict. And Mexico City also has that as well.
Yeah, and Mexico has a stoplight system. And so currently the only two states that are in the green part are Campeche and Chiapas in southern Mexico. So maybe worth checking out those places if you're up for adventure. But we've really enjoyed our time here in Puerto Vallarta. And depending on what you're looking to do, I think if you're looking to, find a place to work and base yourself for a while, if you're a nomad, if you're looking for a place for vacation, I think this area is a pretty good place where you can kind of just, travel safely and have a really enjoyable time. Sayulita seems to be even more kind of on the more chill end of the spectrum. And then some places around here as well seem to be around the same level as Puerto Vallarta. Like I think Acapulco seems to be quite similar, even though it's in a different state.
Yeah, and then we have some friends who were just in Tulum. We have a couple of friends who have been in Tulum over the last couple months. Things in Tulum seem to be, very similar to PV in that there's some standard rules, but overall the vibe is quite relaxed and things are quite relaxed there. So really great place to visit right now. And I would assume just like PV, there's less tourism than normal. And that also means that prices are a little bit lower. So in these places that are often super expensive, especially during high season, a lot of Airbnbs are actually doing discounts, which is really great. So I think that those are some great options, as well as there's a lot of great stuff on the Caribbean coast, like Isla Mujeres and Cozumel and Holbox and places like that. So there's amazing stuff to go visit there. And then, we love Oaxaca. From what I know about Oaxaca, things are pretty good. I think they're a bit more strict on the mask policies, especially wearing masks anytime you leave the apartment or the place that you're staying. So that's one thing to note if you're going to be heading towards Oaxaca City. I would imagine that things are, again, pretty relaxed as you head into the coastal parts of the state of Oaxaca. But again, do your research.
So the last thing we'll cover, and then might cover a little bit of what happens next, but do we feel safe? I think this is something that it did cross our minds before going. And looking over, so since we got here in October to now, I think we both feel very, very, very happy with our decision to come to Mexico. I think we both definitely do feel safe because you're able to do so many things outdoors, and restaurants are very good in terms of like how they space themselves out. We found a co-working space where it's similar, where you're able to get a little bit of a private area for ourselves and be quite distanced from people. It does seem like in Puerto Vallarta, like talking to some of our friends who are here, who have been here longer and who are a bit more connected with the community, that there were a lot of cases within like locals here in Puerto Vallarta earlier on in the summer. Like it seems like because, bars have been, nightclubs aren't open, but they kind of seem to be like a little bit open. It seems like a lot of people, like the younger crowd of people who maybe are working and doing that type of thing, lots of them probably had COVID earlier. So you don't really seem like being here, talking to people doesn't really like sound like too many people are getting sick or testing positive for it, that type of thing. So I think we both feel really safe here. I think honestly, I feel safer than I would if I was in Canada, because if you're in Canada, like you're just kind of like cooped up in your little thing. And so here we're able to get outside, we're able to stay healthy, stay active, get lots of sun and vitamin D. And like when we hung out with friends, it's like we went to the beach and, you're able to maintain good space and not be cramped up with anybody. So definitely do feel safe here. What about you?
Yeah, 100%. I would echo all of that. I feel very, very safe here. And I think for me, a big thing is actually like my mental space and how I feel mentally. And like I mentioned before, I wasn't feeling good mentally in the last few months that we were in Canada. And honestly, probably the whole time we were in Canada, I just felt like everything was always on edge and I was feeling very anxious and very stressed a lot of the time. And being able to come here, I feel like I was able to like let out a big breath, and I feel much more at ease here. I think part of that's the vibe and the energy and just the way that people kind of engage with each other and with the situation. And I think also just being able to be somewhere that's warm and where things are open and people are, a bit more relaxed and that type of thing has been really nice. In terms of the other side of safety, which is, not just the pandemic, it's just in general being in Mexico. I think you guys know, if you've listened for a while, we feel very at home in Mexico. We've spent so much time here. And at this point, I feel pretty much as safe here as I do at home in Canada. So part of that comes from the fact that we've been here for a while. We speak Spanish. Mexico feels like a culture that we're very connected to and that type of thing. But I think if you're kind of worried about if travel is more dangerous now, or if you're going to be going to places that are dangerous and then have the fear of COVID, I don't think that there's a ton to worry about in terms of coming to Mexico. I think that if you're being safe in terms of, COVID safety, and then also just being smart, not walking late at night with all your valuables and, making sure that you're just keeping yourself safe on a kind of regular travel level, I think that here is a really great place to be. I haven't noticed anything that's different since being back here compared to when we were here a year ago in terms of, safety.
Yeah, and so I think all things considered, obviously you want to do your own research and do your own preparation and find what feels right for you in terms of your level of safety. But I think all things considered from our perspective, being here and experiencing things, I do think apart from the actual like getting on the plane and going, life here feels like you're able to make decisions that keep you just as safe as you would be in most home circumstances. Obviously that's our personal experience. You want to do that research for yourself. If you're a Canadian, traveling, if you only have a short limit of time, means doing the quarantine on the way back in. However, if in Alberta, and I think soon to be starting in some other places, they're doing pilot programs where that period of time is shorter. So if you weren't aware of that, definitely do a bit of Googling, find out more information, because you can do something like a test, a quick quarantine, another test, and then you're good to go, depending on where you're going to be, which can make it more accessible to travel and get out and experience in the world. And obviously, if you're American, you don't have that problem. And so if you have questions about travel, I think we're going to leave it there, but always feel free to send us a message. You can find us on Instagram at The World Wanderers Podcast, or you can send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. If you are someone who is working remotely and thinking, maybe I should get out of the cold weather and take a trip and have a bit of adventure this winter since I'm going to be at home anyways, that's exactly what we're talking about on the World Wanderers Insider this month. So we're diving into everything related to that, and you can find that at patreon.com/theworldwanderers. And then once you sign up, you get a link that you can add to your podcast player. So the World Wanderers Insider will pop up right next to your normal World Wanderers feed. It's got a nice blue logo that you'll notice is very, very similar, but a different color. And then you can listen to all the Insider episodes where we're covering lots of great things about how to live a life of travel and career.
All right, friends, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the show. Hopefully you are feeling maybe a little bit more inspired or comfortable about the idea of travel again. And like Ryan said, make sure you reach out if you have any questions for us. We're always happy to hear from you. And we will be back in a couple of weeks for our 2020 year in review, where we'll be updating you on what's next for us and going through this wild, wild year. So we will see you then. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out the World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.